The morning sun had just started to rise when a man in his mid-40s sat quietly in his car, parked across from one of his own restaurants. From the outside, it looked like any other burger place in town. Bright red signs, big windows showing smiling customers, and the smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. To anyone passing by, it was just another fast food joint, but to him it was a symbol of years of hard work, sacrifice, and long nights that had finally turned into something real. He had built this business from nothing. It started with one small food truck, old and rusty, that barely ran. He used to cook burgers himself, wiping sweat from his forehead under the summer sun, handing out orders with a grin even when he was exhausted. People loved the food, but they loved his energy even more. Slowly, with patience and faith, that one truck turned into a restaurant, and then another, until he had more than 40 locations spread across several cities. Yet, success came with distance. He wasn't flipping burgers anymore. He wasn't talking to customers every day or joking with his team during slow hours. Now he spent most of his time in meetings, signing papers, and looking at numbers on screens. Somewhere along the way, the feeling of connection he once had with his workers and customers had started to fade. That morning, he wanted to feel it again. Not through reports or management summaries, but in person, like he used to. He wanted to know what it felt like to be just a customer again. He wanted to see how his employees treated ordinary people when they didn't know the boss was watching. He took a deep breath, adjusted his old baseball cap, and looked at his reflection in the car mirror. His usual clean suit and shiny shoes were gone. Instead, he wore a faded t-shirt, jeans with a tear on one knee, and a pair of worn sneakers. To make sure no one would recognize him, he left his expensive watch at home. Today, he didn't want to be the owner. He just wanted to be a man buying a burger. As he stepped out of the car, the cool breeze brushed against his skin. He could hear the city waking up, cars honking, birds chirping, people rushing to work. The smell from the restaurant made his stomach growl a little. It had been a long time since he'd eaten one of his own burgers straight off the grill. He walked across the parking lot, slowly, observing. The big sign over the door looked freshly painted, but the windows had smudges. The trash can near the entrance was half full, and there were a few napkins on the ground. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't perfect either. He noticed these things not as a critic, but as someone who cared deeply. When he stepped inside, the familiar sound of sizzling oil and clinking spatulas filled the air. The smell of fries instantly brought back memories. For a moment he felt proud. People were laughing, kids were eating, and the place was alive. But then he started to really listen. Behind the counter, a young woman in a uniform stood with a bored expression. Her eyes looked tired, and her tone was flat as she called out orders. Another worker was wiping tables half-heartedly, glancing at his phone between swipes. The manager wasn't in sight. It didn't seem like anyone was smiling because they wanted to. He got in line quietly. In front of him, a mother and her 2 children were ordering. The cashier smiled politely at them, but her smile disappeared the moment they walked away. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the counter and greeted her warmly. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "How are you today?" The woman barely looked up. "Yeah, what can I get you?" she mumbled. He paused for a second, a little surprised by her tone, but he didn't want to judge too quickly. "Just a cheeseburger meal, please." With fries and a bottle of water. She nodded, tapped the screen, and said, "That'll be $8.95. He handed her a $10 bill, but she didn't take it right away. She was talking to the cook behind her, complaining that her shift was too long. When she finally took the money, she sighed loudly as if the simple act of giving change was a burden. He noticed her name tag, but kept it to himself. He wasn't here to embarrass anyone. He just wanted to see, to understand. Still, something about her attitude stung a little. As he waited for his food, he looked around the restaurant. A few customers were enjoying their meals quietly. One man at the corner table was eating alone, scrolling through his phone. A group of teenagers laughed as they shared fries. It was a normal day, but underneath that normalcy, something felt off. The energy that once filled his restaurants, that warmth he used to insist on, seemed to be missing. Then he heard something that made his chest tighten. The cashier leaned over to her coworker and whispered, not very quietly, "I don't know why they keep opening more of these places. The boss doesn't care about us. He just wants more money." Her coworker shrugged. "Yeah, they say the owner used to be one of us, but look at him now. Probably doesn't even remember what it's like to work here. The man felt a heavy weight in his chest. They were wrong, so wrong. But he couldn't blame them for thinking that. Maybe he had become too distant. Maybe he had been so focused on growing the business that he'd forgotten to stay connected with the people keeping it alive. When his order was finally ready, the cashier called out, "Order 52. Her voice was sharp, impatient. He stepped forward to get his bag, but before he could thank her, she dropped it onto the counter and walked away to talk to another worker. He looked down at the bag, grease stains on the side, fries spilling out slightly, and then looked back up. For a brief second, he considered saying something, maybe to remind her to be kinder, maybe to ask if everything was okay. But he stopped himself. He wasn't the owner today. He was just another customer. He picked up the bag, said a quiet thank you even though she didn't hear it, and walked outside. The air felt different now. The same sunlight that had looked warm before now felt a little harsh. He sat on the bench outside and opened his food. The burger looked fine, just like always. He took a bite. It tasted good, the same flavor that had made people fall in love with his cooking years ago. But something about the moment felt hollow. As he ate, he thought about the people inside, the cashier, the cook, the customers. He wondered if they knew how much effort had gone into building that place. How many nights he'd slept in his truck, saving every dollar just to keep the business alive. How much he had dreamed of creating jobs that treated people with respect. He thought about his team at the headquarters, the managers who sent him weekly reports saying everything was running smoothly. On paper, the numbers looked perfect. Good sales, high profits, stable growth. But sitting there with that burger, he realized that numbers didn't tell the whole story. A business could be making money and still be losing something far more important. He remembered his first employee years ago, a teenager who used to show up early and clean tables before opening time. Back then, he had made sure every worker felt seen, valued, and respected. He used to tell them, "We don't just serve food, we serve people." Those words had meant something once now. He wasn't sure if anyone still believed them. A few minutes later, he saw a little boy drop his soda cup near the door. The mother apologized to the staff, but no one came to help her. The cashier pointed to the napkin stand and said, "There are some tissues over there," before turning away. The man's heart sank again. That wasn't the kind of service he had built this brand on. That wasn't the culture he had dreamed of. He finished his meal slowly, watching as cars came and went. He noticed how some customers smiled politely, while others looked disappointed. It was subtle, but it was there, the small signs that something had changed. He stayed for almost an hour, quietly observing everything. The way employees spoke to each other, how they treated customers, how they moved. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't care either. It was just routine. People going through the motions. When he finally stood up to leave, he took one last look at the sign above the restaurant. His name wasn't on it, but he knew it represented him, his journey, his values, his story. And right now it felt like that story had drifted away from the heart it once had. He walked back to his car, the half-empty cup of water still in his hand. Sitting behind the wheel, he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. The visit had given him more than he expected. It wasn't anger he felt, it was sadness mixed with disappointment, but also clarity. He now understood what he needed to do. If the heart of his business had grown cold, then it was up to him to bring warmth back. Not through speeches or slogans, but through real actions. He didn't yet know how, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something that needed to change. The morning sun had barely risen when a man in his mid-40s parked across the street from one of his own restaurants. From the outside, it looked like any other burger place, the kind you could find in almost every neighborhood. Bright red sign, big windows showing tables inside, the smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. For most people, it was just another stop for breakfast or lunch. For him, it was the dream he had built with his own hands. He had started small years ago with one food truck that barely ran. The fryer made strange noises, and the grill sometimes shut off in the middle of a rush. Still, he worked long days taking orders, cooking burgers, wiping sweat from his forehead and smiling through the heat. Customers came back because the food was good, but also because they liked the way he treated them. He talked to everyone like a friend. Over time, word spread. The truck turned into a small shop, then another, and before long, his brand had grown into dozens of restaurants across several cities. Now, Success had taken him away from the counter and into offices and meetings. His schedule was packed with phone calls, contracts, and numbers on screens. He still loved his business, but lately he had started to feel a distance between what he imagined his restaurants were and what they had actually become. Reports told him that things were fine. Profits were steady, customers were coming back, but something in his gut told him there was more to the story. That morning, he decided to find out for himself. He wanted to see how his workers treated people when nobody knew who he was. No special treatment, no polite smiles just because the boss was around. He wanted the truth even if it hurt. He dressed the part. The suit stayed in the closet. Instead, he wore a faded gray t-shirt, jeans with a frayed knee, and a baseball cap pulled low. His sneakers were old, the kind he used to wear back in the food truck days. He left his watch at home and slipped his wallet into his pocket. Looking in the mirror, he saw not the business owner everyone respected, but an ordinary man grabbing lunch. He sat in the car for a moment, watching customers walk in and out. Families, workers, students. The parking lot was half full, which was good for a weekday morning. He noticed a few wrappers scattered near the trash can by the door. Nothing terrible, but not as clean as he liked. The glass on the windows needed wiping. Small details, but he had built his brand on details. He took a deep breath and crossed the street. The air smelled like fries, warm and salty. As he opened the door, a familiar sound filled his ears. The sizzling of burgers on the grill, the beeping of fryers, the chatter of customers. For a brief second, memories flooded back. His first day serving customers, his first sold-out lunch, the laughter and the noise that once made him proud. He smiled to himself and stepped in line. The restaurant looked well kept overall, but the energy felt different. The young woman behind the counter looked tired. Her shoulders slumped, and her voice lacked life as she called out orders. A man in the kitchen worked quickly, flipping patties, not saying a word. Near the window, another worker wiped tables, glancing at his phone between swipes. The manager wasn't visible. It was running smoothly enough, but it felt cold, like people were just doing what they had to do, not what they wanted to. He waited patiently behind a small family. The cashier smiled faintly at them, but her smile disappeared as soon as they walked away. When it was his turn, he stepped forward. "Good morning," he said kindly. "How are you today?" The cashier barely looked up. "Hi, what can I get you?" Her tone was flat. He hesitated for a second. "Just a cheeseburger meal, please. Fries and a water." She tapped the screen. "That's $8.95. He handed her a $10 bill. She took it without meeting his eyes, then turned to speak to the cook. "I'm so over this shift," she muttered. The cook laughed quietly. The sound made his chest tighten, but he stayed silent. He wasn't here to judge or correct anyone, just to see what the customers saw. He waited off to the side, watching. 2 more customers came in and got the same tired greeting. No one said thank you. The cashier's face never changed. She looked like someone who had stopped caring long ago. He wondered if management knew. He wondered if anyone ever checked in on how employees were feeling, or if they only cared about sales reports and efficiency. Then he heard her whisper to her coworker, thinking no one else could hear. "These people come in here acting like we owe them something. I can't wait until corporate sends new management. Maybe they'll finally clean this place up." Her coworker shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The big boss probably never comes here anyway." He stood there, expression calm, but inside something shifted. They didn't know him, and they didn't know that the man they were talking about was standing just a few feet away. Part of him wanted to speak up, to remind them that behind every company there's a person who started with nothing but hope. But he bit his tongue. He had chosen this. He wanted honesty, and he was getting it. When his food was ready, the cashier dropped the bag on the counter. "Order 52, she said without looking up. He walked over, took it gently, and said, "Thank you." She didn't answer. Outside, the air was bright and calm. He sat on a bench near the door and opened the bag. Fries spilled out of the wrapper, warm and golden. The burger looked perfect, just as it always had. He took a bite. The taste was familiar and comforting, but something about it felt different. Maybe it wasn't the food that had changed, but the feeling behind it. He looked through the window as he ate. Customers came and went. Most seemed satisfied enough. But he noticed little things. The cashier not smiling, the cook looking frustrated, a mother cleaning up her child's spill while staff ignored her. It wasn't the picture of care and warmth he had always promised himself to protect. He remembered the early days when he'd tell new workers, "We're not just selling food. We're giving people a small reason to smile today." Back then he meant it and they believed him. Now looking through that glass, he wondered if anyone even said those words anymore. A group of teenagers walked in, laughing loudly. The cashier's face hardened. "Can you order one at a time, please?" she said impatiently. The kids looked uncomfortable, whispering among themselves before stepping back into line. He felt a pang of sadness. The place was supposed to feel friendly. That had been his promise. He stayed longer than he planned, just observing quietly. A man at the next table was eating alone, scrolling through his phone. A delivery driver rushed in, grabbed his order and left. It all looked normal from the outside, but he could sense a deeper problem. The warmth, the pride, the little spark that made his restaurant special, it had faded. He wondered how long it had been like this. Months? Years? Maybe it started the moment he stopped showing up. Maybe people forgot what he stood for because they hadn't seen him in so long. A business could grow too fast, he realized, and in that growth it could lose its soul. He crumpled his napkin slowly, staring at the logo on his burger wrapper. It represented everything he had worked for. Every late night, every loan, every dream. But now it felt like it was slipping away. He thought about his employees. They weren't bad people. They were just disconnected. Somewhere along the line, communication had turned into policy, and care had turned into training manuals. As he sat there, he heard the door open behind him. The same cashier stepped out, holding a drink, chatting with another worker. She laughed, unaware of who was sitting a few feet away. "If I owned this place, I'd do things so different," she said. "We need someone who actually listens." He turned his head slightly but didn't speak. There was nothing to say, not yet. He wanted to understand before he acted. Listening to her words hurt, but it also told him something important. People didn't just want higher pay or shorter shifts. They wanted to feel heard. They wanted to belong. After they went back inside, he sat quietly for a while. Cars drove past, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. He thought about his journey, how far he had come and how easy it was to forget the simple things once success arrived. He had built this brand on kindness, on respect, on community. Now he was seeing how fragile those things could be. Finishing his water, he looked up at the sign above the restaurant door. The colors still looked bold in the sunlight, the same as always. But behind that bright surface, something was missing. He knew he couldn't fix it with another meeting or memo. This needed something real, something that came from the heart. He stood up, brushed off his jeans, and took one last look through the window. The cashier was back at the counter, the cook still working silently. It was just another day for them. For him, it was the start of a wake-up call. As he walked back to his car, he didn't feel angry. He felt thoughtful, even a little heavy inside. What he had seen wasn't failure. It was a reminder. Success wasn't just about how many restaurants had opened. It was about the spirit inside them, the way people treated each other, the way a customer left feeling better than when they came in. He opened the car door and sat for a moment, staring at the bag of food beside him. The same taste that had once meant triumph now carried a quiet lesson. He realized he had a choice. Ignore what he saw and keep moving, or face it head on and bring the heart back to his business. He knew what he would do. He started the engine, the soft hum filling the silence. The world outside kept moving, unaware that a simple burger visit had just changed the direction of a man's purpose. As he drove away, he glanced once more in the rearview mirror at the restaurant growing smaller behind him. It wasn't just a place that sold food. It was a reflection of him, and he was ready to make sure it reflected something better again. The following week passed slowly. The man couldn't stop thinking about that visit. He went through his normal routine, meetings, phone calls, reviewing reports. But his mind kept drifting back to that small restaurant and the conversation he had overheard. He had built this business on respect and kindness, yet somewhere along the way, something important had been lost. He had always believed that how people treat others when no one is watching says more than any report ever could. What he saw and heard that day told him there was a problem, one that couldn't be ignored. He decided to visit the restaurant again, this time not undercover. It was time for honesty. He wanted to speak to his staff face to face, not to shame or punish them, but to remind them what this business truly stood for. When the day came, he dressed like himself again, clean shirt, Neat jacket, shoes polished, though still simple. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just wanted to show up with respect. As he parked outside, the same restaurant looked different now. Maybe it was the morning light, or maybe it was the heavy mix of disappointment and determination inside him. He walked through the doors quietly. A few customers were eating, and the same cashier from before was behind the counter chatting with another worker. The moment her eyes met his, her smile froze. He could see recognition flicker in her face. She blinked twice, unsure if she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. He stepped closer, calm and steady. "Good morning," he said kindly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "Is the manager here?" The cashier swallowed hard, her face turning pale. Yes, one moment," she said quickly and disappeared into the back. The cook and another staff member looked confused. The customers glanced up briefly, sensing something unusual, but not sure what. A few seconds later, a man in a collared shirt came out from the kitchen. "Hello, sir," he said politely, not recognizing him right away. "Can I help you?" "Yes," the owner replied, his tone still calm. "My name is, well, you probably already know. I own this restaurant." The manager's face changed immediately. His polite smile turned into surprise and then into nervousness. "Oh, sir, of course. I didn't know you were coming today. If I'd known, The owner raised a hand gently. "It's all right. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to see how things were running on a normal day." The room grew quiet. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed distant. The cashier stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes darting anywhere but at him. The cook stopped what he was doing. "I'd like to speak to everyone, please," the owner said softly. "Just for a few minutes." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." He went around, calling the small team together. The few customers inside could sense something serious happening. Some watched curiously while others quietly finished their meals and left. Within minutes, the entire staff stood near the counter. A few had nervous smiles, others just looked down at the floor. The owner took a slow breath before speaking. "I came here last week," he began. His voice was calm but carried emotion that instantly filled the room. "Not dressed like this. Not as the owner. I came as a regular customer." The cashier's face went red. Her hands trembled slightly and she avoided eye contact. "I ordered a burger," he continued, "and I listened. I watched how customers were treated, how you treated each other, and how you carried yourselves. I didn't come to judge, I came to understand." He paused, letting the silence settle. No one moved. "What I heard and saw that day," he said softly, "broke my heart." The words hit like a gentle wave, not loud, not angry, but heavy with truth. He could see the guilt on their faces, especially the young cashier's. She bit her lip, eyes filling with tears. "I built this place from nothing," he went on, "from one small truck that barely ran. I used to wake up before sunrise, cook food myself, serve people with a smile no matter how tired I was. I wanted this brand to be more than a restaurant. I wanted it to be a place where people felt welcome, customers and workers alike." He looked around the room. "But that day I didn't feel welcome. I felt invisible. I heard things that made me realize we've lost touch with what made us special." The manager shifted awkwardly. A worker in the back rubbed his neck. The air was heavy but honest. He turned his attention gently toward the cashier, not with anger but with compassion. "I heard words from this counter that hurt more than you can imagine," he said quietly. "Words about people, about customers, about management. Maybe you didn't mean harm. Maybe you were just tired or frustrated. I understand that. We all have bad days, but those words matter. The way we speak when we think no one's listening says who we truly are." The cashier finally looked up, her eyes wet. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know." He stopped her with a small nod. "I know you didn't. That's why we're here." He took another slow breath. "I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here because I want us to be better. Because we can be." The staff looked surprised. Some had expected shouting or punishment, but instead, his voice carried patience and heart. "When I started this business," he said, "I made a promise to myself and to every person who'd ever work here that this place would never just be about money. It would be about people, about kindness, about opportunity." He paused, his voice steady but full of feeling. "If we lose that, then all the success, all the growth means nothing." The room stayed silent. The only sound was the quiet hum of the fryer. He gestured toward the counter. "Every person who walks in here might be tired. They might be having a bad day. Maybe this meal is the only good thing they get today. We don't know their stories, but we can choose how we make them feel. That's the power we have, and that's what I want us to remember. He looked at the manager. We're going to start something new, something that brings that spirit back. I'll be coming here more often, not to check on you, but to work with you. I'll be standing behind that counter serving customers just like I used to. The staff's eyes widened. The cashier blinked in disbelief. Yes, he said with a small smile. I'm serious. I want you all to see that I'm not just some man behind an office desk. I'm one of you. I've been where you are, and I know how hard this job can be. He stepped back, letting the words sink in. Then he said quietly, mistakes happen. What matters is what we do after them. The cashier finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I really am sorry. I was wrong to speak the way I did. I was frustrated and tired, but that doesn't make it right. He nodded, his expression gentle. Thank you for saying that. That takes courage. The others watched silently. The atmosphere had changed. The tension that filled the room earlier was melting into something else. Reflection. Maybe even hope. I don't want anyone here to feel scared or small, he said. I want you to feel proud. But pride comes from care. When we care about our work, about each other, that's when customers notice. That's when this place feels alive again. He looked around the restaurant, at the tables, the counter, the kitchen door. This restaurant isn't just mine. It's ours. Every burger flipped, every smile given, every thank you, it all builds what we stand for. The cook nodded slowly. The manager's posture softened. Even the worker who'd been quiet the whole time looked thoughtful. The owner smiled faintly. I'm not angry, he said. If anything, I'm grateful, because what I heard that day woke me up too. I realized I'd become too distant. I stopped showing up. I left it to numbers and reports when I should have been right here, seeing it for myself. He let out a small sigh, one that carried both weariness and relief. That changes today. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the cook broke the silence. Sir, he said hesitantly, thank you for not giving up on us. The owner smiled again, a soft, genuine one. Why would I? You're the reason this place exists. He looked back at the cashier. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. I don't want guilt. I want growth. She nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'll do better, she said. I promise. I believe you, he replied simply. He stepped back and took one last look at his team. The faces that had once looked scared now seemed thoughtful, even hopeful. He could see the shift, small but real. The spark that had been missing started to flicker back to life. I'll be back tomorrow, he said softly, not as the boss, just as someone who believes in this place. We'll figure things out together. As he turned to leave, the cashier whispered, Thank you for giving us another chance. He looked over his shoulder and said, Everyone deserves one. When he stepped outside, the sun was brighter than before. The air felt lighter too, like something heavy had finally lifted. He walked to his car slowly, the sound of laughter faintly returning inside the restaurant. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a start. He sat in the driver's seat, took one last look at the building, and smiled quietly. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen, because now everyone, including him, understood something important. Respect, kindness, and care weren't just good business values. They were the foundation of everything that mattered. The next morning came early. The owner woke before sunrise, just as he used to when his business first began. He made coffee, stood by the window, and looked out at the quiet streets. The world always felt honest at that hour before the rush of the day began. He thought about what he had said to his staff the day before, about how he had promised to come back and work beside them. It wasn't an easy promise to keep, but it was one he meant from his heart. He dressed simply again. No suit, no jacket this time. Just a plain shirt, clean jeans, and a cap. He didn't want to look like a boss. He wanted to be part of the team, to remind himself what it felt like to stand behind that counter, to take orders, to serve people. Face to face, that was where his dream had started, and it was where he needed to return. When he arrived, the restaurant was just opening. The same manager from before was unlocking the door, surprised to see him standing there so early. Morning, sir, the manager said, a little uncertain. Didn't expect you this soon. The owner smiled. Morning. I told you I'd be back. Let's get to work. He stepped inside, rolled up his sleeves, and went straight to washing his hands. The cook looked over from the kitchen, half smiling. "You really meant it, huh?" "Of course," the owner said. "We're all in this together." The cashier walked in a few minutes later, eyes wide when she saw him standing behind the counter. "You came back," she said quietly. "I said I would," he replied with a small grin. "You ready for another day?" She nodded a little nervously, but there was a different look in her eyes this time. Less fear, more determination. As the morning rush began, he worked like anyone else. He greeted customers, took orders, wiped tables, carried trays, and even flipped burgers when the kitchen got busy. It had been years since he'd done those things, but his hands remembered. The rhythm came back naturally. The customers didn't seem to recognize him, and that was fine by him. To them, he was just another friendly worker who smiled and made sure their fries were hot. But to the staff, seeing their boss work shoulder to shoulder with them changed something. The air felt lighter, more alive. People started helping each other more. There were thank yous, small laughs, and real smiles again. During a short break, he sat at one of the tables with the manager and the cashier. They were tired but smiling. "You know," the manager said, "I think today's the best mood this place has had in a long time." The owner nodded slowly. "It's not about me being here. It's about how we treat each other. That's what makes a place feel good." The cashier looked down, fidgeting with her hands. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday," she admitted softly. "About how words matter. I didn't realize how careless I'd become. I used to love this job, but somewhere along the line I stopped caring. I think I let stress turn me bitter." He smiled gently. "We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is finding it again." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make it right." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just keep being honest and kind, to customers and to yourself." They went back to work, and for the first time in months, the restaurant felt like it had purpose again. Customers noticed, too. A few even complimented the staff on their service. The cashier smiled when she heard it, something she hadn't done in a long time. Later that afternoon, when things slowed down, the owner gathered everyone together again. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how we can make sure this change lasts. Not just here, but in every location we have." The cook wiped his hands and said, "You mean like new rules?" The owner shook his head. "Not rules, values. You can't force someone to care with rules. You have to remind them why they should." He went on to explain his idea. Training sessions focused not just on tasks or sales, but on empathy, teamwork, and communication. "We'll talk about what kindness looks like at work. We'll share stories, help each other grow, and make sure every new person we hire understands what we stand for." The staff nodded. The cashier said quietly, "That sounds different, in a good way." "It has to be different," he said. "If we keep doing things the same, nothing will change." That night after closing, he stayed back to clean with the team. No one asked him to, but he grabbed a mop and helped anyway. They talked, joked, and laughed as they worked. For the first time, the staff saw their boss not as someone distant or unreachable, but as a person, someone who cared deeply, just like they did. When everything was spotless, he sat on a stool and looked around. The restaurant glowed softly under the lights. It looked the same as it always had, but the energy was completely new. The staff waved goodnight, smiling as they left one by one. The cashier paused at the door, turned and said, "See you tomorrow." He smiled. "I'll be here." After everyone left, he sat there alone for a while. He thought about how much had changed in just a few days. He'd walked in a stranger, and now he felt like he belonged again. He realized that leadership wasn't about distance or authority. It was about presence. Being there, listening, caring. Over the next few weeks, he visited more locations. Some were running well. Others showed signs of the same problem. He didn't go as the boss, he went as a learner. He talked to the employees, asked questions, and listened to their struggles. Some said they felt forgotten by management, that communication only came when something went wrong. Others said they wanted more training, more recognition, more reason to care. He took notes, real notes. Then he began to rebuild piece by piece. He gathered all his managers from different branches and shared his vision with them. At first they were nervous, unsure what this new empathy training meant. But when he told them the story of his undercover visit, what he'd seen and heard, they understood. "This business isn't just about selling food," he said during the meeting. "It's about giving people dignity. That includes our customers, but it starts with our workers. If they feel unseen, they'll stop caring. And when they stop caring, everything falls apart." The managers listened in silence. Some nodded. Others looked down, reflecting on their own habits. "We're going to do things differently now," he continued. "We're going to listen more. We're going to treat people with patience, and we're going to build an environment that reminds every worker they matter." From that day, things began to change across the company. The new training sessions weren't about reading slides or memorizing phrases. They were about real conversations. Employees shared stories, laughed, cried, and opened up about the challenges they faced. The owner made sure to attend some of them himself, sitting quietly among his team, learning as much as he taught. The cashier from the first restaurant even spoke during one session. She told her story honestly, how she'd let frustration cloud her kindness, how she'd judged people unfairly, and how that one visit from a stranger changed everything. The room listened in silence. When she finished, people applauded softly. The owner felt proud, not of the business, but of the growth he was seeing in people. Word spread through the company that the owner was visiting stores again, talking to staff personally. It made people feel noticed. Managers started paying closer attention. Employees began taking more pride in their work. Slowly, the energy that had once filled the brand returned. The owner started receiving letters, some from workers, others from customers. One letter stood out. It was from the same cashier. She wrote, "I used to think this was just a job. Now I realize it's a chance to make someone's day better, even if it's just through a smile or a kind word. Thank you for showing me that again." He read that letter more than once. It reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place. Months passed and the company grew stronger. Sales improved too, but that wasn't what made him happiest. It was the feeling, the warmth, the laughter, the sense of belonging that had returned. Every time he visited a restaurant now, he was greeted with genuine smiles and handshakes. One day, he stopped by the same location where everything had begun. The place looked brighter, cleaner, and filled with cheerful noise. The cashier greeted customers warmly. The cook hummed while working, and the manager joked with a child waiting for his meal. The owner stood near the door, watching quietly. It was the same building, the same sign, but it felt completely new. When the cashier saw him, she waved. "Hey, you want your usual burger?" she called out, laughing. He smiled back. "I think I'll take a coffee this time," he said. As she poured it, she looked up and said, "You know, I think people can feel the difference now. They come in smiling. It's like the place has a new heart." He nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "That's because it does," he said softly. Outside, the sun shone bright over the sign that carried his brand. For the first time in a long while, he didn't just see a business. He saw people connected, alive, proud. He saw a dream that had nearly lost its way but found its soul again through honesty, humility, and love. He walked back to his car with a peaceful smile. It had taken a few hard lessons, some uncomfortable truths, and a lot of reflection. But he had learned something priceless. Success isn't measured by how many places bear your name. It's measured by how many hearts your work touches. As he drove away, he felt lighter than he had in years. The journey wasn't over, but it was finally heading in the right direction. Weeks turned into months, and the changes that had begun slowly at the first restaurant began to ripple through all the locations. The owner made it a habit to visit at least one branch every week. Sometimes he went in the early morning helping with prep. Other times he stayed for the lunch rush, taking orders, cleaning tables, and checking in with staff. He made sure to speak to employees, asking about their days, listening to concerns, and praising efforts when he saw them. The staff began to respond. Where there had once been quiet frustration, there was now chatter, laughter, and small acts of care. People held doors open for each other, shared tips on the best way to handle the busy hours, and even started encouraging newcomers. Managers began noticing small improvements, employees arriving a few minutes early, greeting customers with smiles, and even staying a little longer after shifts to help tidy the place. He noticed it too. It wasn't the numbers on a report that made him happy. It was seeing the spark return in people's eyes. Customers were noticing it as well. The restaurant felt warmer. There were more smiles, more conversations, and even more laughter echoing through the small dining areas. One afternoon, he returned to the first restaurant where he had gone undercover months earlier. The sun was bright and the smell of fries and burgers filled the parking lot as usual. He opened the door and walked in. The cashier, now smiling naturally, greeted him. "Good afternoon. Your usual coffee?" she said, joking. He laughed. "Not today. Just a water." "Just a water?" she said with mock disappointment. "Okay, we'll make it quick then." He noticed the cook humming a tune while working, and the manager helping a family with their order. It was the same building he had walked into months ago, but now it felt alive. The warmth in the air was unmistakable. He moved to the back for a quick chat with the manager. "How's everything going?" he asked. The manager leaned on the counter, smiling. "Better than ever. The team's more motivated. The customers are happier. Even the new employees are picking up the spirit we've been working on." "That's good to hear," the owner said, his voice quiet but full of pride. "But how are you, really?" The manager's smile softened. "Honestly, I feel like I finally understand what we're supposed to do. I used to feel like I was just following rules, but now it feels like I'm helping people. It feels meaningful." The owner nodded. He had felt the same way when he had returned to work at the counter himself. Success wasn't about the numbers. It was about people, making sure they felt seen, appreciated, and part of something bigger than themselves. Later that day, he sat in the empty dining area, watching the staff move with purpose and care. He remembered the young cashier who had once muttered unkind words under her breath, completely unaware that he had overheard. Now she was different. She greeted customers warmly, helped them patiently, and even took the time to show a new employee the ropes. He thought about the courage it had taken for her to admit she had been wrong, and how she had worked to improve. It made him feel proud, not because she had been caught, but because she had chosen growth. The owner realized then that this was the real reward of leadership. It wasn't about control or authority. It wasn't about power or profits. It was about helping people find the best version of themselves, and when that happened, the business thrived naturally. He decided to take the lessons he had learned and make them part of the company's culture permanently. He organized workshops for all employees, not just managers. These sessions were simple but powerful. They didn't focus on rules or charts. They focused on empathy, communication, and teamwork. Employees shared their own experiences, learned from each other, and found ways to solve problems together. During one of these workshops, the cashier from the first restaurant spoke again. She told the story of the day he had gone undercover, the words she had spoken, the embarrassment she had felt when she realized who he really was, and the change she had made afterward. Everyone listened quietly, some nodding, some wiping tears from their eyes. It was raw and honest, and it touched every person in the room. Afterward, one of the newer employees approached him. "I wasn't here that day," the young worker said, "but hearing her story made me realize something. This place isn't just a job. It's a chance to be better, to treat people with respect. I want to be part of that." The owner smiled. That was exactly what he had hoped for. The culture he had once worried was lost was now spreading. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. One quiet evening after closing, he walked through the empty restaurant. The tables were clean, the chairs neatly aligned, and the kitchen smelled faintly of fries and grilled meat. He sat on a stool near the counter, remembering how different things had been months ago. He thought about the cashier, the manager, and every worker who had stepped up to change. He thought about the customers who had walked in, expecting nothing more than a quick meal, and left with something more: politeness, care, or even a small moment of happiness. It occurred to him that all of this had started with a single moment of honesty. Going undercover had been uncomfortable, even painful. Hearing the words spoken without knowing who he was had hurt, but that moment had forced him to see the truth and act. Without it, none of this would have happened. He realized something else. Change didn't happen from lectures or rules. It happened from example. It happened when people saw someone care enough to be present, to listen, to work alongside them. It happened when leadership was about connection, not control. He left the restaurant that night feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The business was thriving, yes, but more importantly, the people in it were thriving. They had discovered something important. They mattered. Their actions mattered. Their words mattered. Over time, the ripple effect continued. Employees started mentoring each other, helping newcomers, and finding pride in their work. Managers held regular check-ins, not to enforce rules but to understand their team. Customers noticed the difference, leaving notes of appreciation or returning again and again, not just for the food, but for the warmth and respect they felt. The owner continued to visit each location, walking among his staff quietly, observing, listening, and participating. Every visit reminded him why he had started in the first place. Every visit showed him that success wasn't just about building more restaurants. It was about building hearts and trust. One afternoon, as he sat outside the first restaurant, sipping water and watching the world go by, the cashier approached him. She handed him a small note. He opened it and read quietly, "Thank you, not just for giving me a chance to do better, but for showing me what kindness really looks like. You reminded all of us that people matter more than profits. That lesson will stay with me always." He smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. This was the reward he had been waiting for. Not recognition, not money, not fame, but the quiet knowledge that he had made a difference. He reflected on the journey. From the first food truck to the dozens of restaurants, from the successes to the mistakes, the highs to the disappointments, everything had led to this moment. He understood now that leadership was never about the building, the sign, or even the money. It was about showing up, speaking honestly, listening deeply, and caring truly. That evening, as he drove home, he felt lighter than he had in years. The city lights flickered past, but he wasn't focused on what was ahead. He was focused on what he had already built. A team that had grown stronger, a company that had found its heart again, and a culture rooted in respect and empathy. He knew challenges would come again. There would always be busy days, frustrated workers and customers who were hard to please. But he also knew the difference now. He knew that when people feel valued, they rise to the occasion. He knew that honesty, presence, and care were stronger than fear, frustration, or indifference. He smiled quietly to himself. The business was no longer just a collection of restaurants. It was a community. It was a place where mistakes could be forgiven, lessons could be learned, and growth was always possible. As he parked his car and looked up at the night sky, he realized something important. The true success of a business, of any business, isn't measured in numbers or locations. It's measured in the hearts it touches, the respect it earns, and the people it helps become better. And in that moment, he knew, after all the struggles, the hard lessons, and the quiet reflection, he had succeeded. Not because of the profits or expansion, but because he had remembered what really mattered. People first, always. He closed the car door, took a deep breath, and smiled. The journey wasn't over, but he had finally found the heart of it, and that heart would guide him, his staff, and his company for many years to come. The lights of the city shone around him as he drove home slowly, content in the knowledge that this story, his story, was no longer just about a business. It was about humanity, connection, and the power of listening when it matters most. He knew he had turned a single painful truth into a lesson that would change countless lives, and that more than anything was worth everything.